So we'll start today's reading with Ajahn Jeff, where I left off from his analysis. We're speaking about the Khandas. So I'll just read this last paragraph again because it's quite helpful. He writes, freed, disassociated, and released from form, the Tathagata dwells with unrestricted awareness. Freed, dissociated, and released from feelings, perceptions, fabrications, consciousness, birth, aging, death, suffering and stress, defilement, the Tathagata dwells with unrestricted awareness. This shows again the importance of bringing the right questions to the teachings on the Khandas. If you use them to define what you are as a person, you tie yourself down to no purpose. The questions keep piling on, but if you use them to put an end to suffering, your questions fall away and you're free. You never again cling to the Khandas and no longer need to use them to end your self-created suffering. As long as you're still alive, you can employ the Khandas as needed for whatever skillful uses you see fit. After that, you're liberated from all uses and needs, including the need to find words to describe that freedom to yourself or to anyone else. So this is from Samyutta 22, Sutta 2. Venerable Sariputta said, friends, in foreign lands there are wise nobles and priests, householders and contemplatives. For the people there are wise and discriminating, who will question a monk. What is your teacher's doctrine? What does he teach? Thus asked, you should answer. Our teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire. Having thus been answered, there may be wise nobles and priests, householders and contemplatives who will question you further. And your teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire for what? Thus asked, you should answer. Our teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire for form, for feeling, for perception, for fabrications. Our teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire for consciousness. Having thus been answered, there may be wise nobles and priests, householders and contemplatives who will question you further. And seeing what danger does your teacher teach the subduing of passion and desire for form, feeling, perception, fabrications? Seeing what danger does your teacher teach the subduing of passion and desire for consciousness? Thus asked, you should answer. When one is not free from passion, desire, love, thirst, fever, and craving for form, then from any change and alteration in that form, there arises sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. When one is not free from passion, for feeling, for perception, for fabrications, when one is not free from passion, desire, love, thirst, fever, and craving for consciousness, then from any change and alteration in that consciousness, there arises sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Seeing this danger, our teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire for form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and for consciousness. Having thus been answered, there may be wise and noble priests, householders, and contemplatives who will question you further. And seeing what benefit does your teacher teach the subduing of passion and desire for form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness? Thus asked, you should answer. When one is free from passion, desire, love, thirst, fear, and craving for form, then with any change and alteration in that form, there does not arise any sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, or despair. The same for passion, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. Seeing this benefit, our teacher teaches the subduing of passion and desire for form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. If there's any comments, I'll just stop after each sutta, just because...
Do you know the Pali for what he translates as unrestricted awareness?
I'm not sure. I don't know, because he doesn't actually, he rarely puts his Pali translations in there. I think it is one of his specific phrases. I'm trying to remember which it is. Restricted awareness. Yeah, it wouldn't be in this book. But
Okay.
I have come across that as a specific term he uses for a Pali translation, and that's why it sounds a bit different. Okay, so now this is in the section constructing the aggregates. So this is Samyutta Nikaya 22, Sutta 100. Monks, from an inconceivable beginning comes transmigration. A beginning point is not evident, although beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving are transmigrating and wandering on. It's just as when a dog is tied by a leash to a post or stake. If it walks right around that post or stake. If it stands right next to that post or stake. If it sits right next to that post or stake. If it lies down right next to that post or stake. In the same way, an uninstructed run-of-the-mill person regards form as, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am. He regards feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness as the same. If he walks right around these 5 clinging aggregates. If he stands right next to these 5 clinging aggregates. If he sits right next to these 5 clinging aggregates. If he lies down right next to these 5 clinging aggregates. Thus one should reflect on one's mind with every moment. For a long time has this mind been defiled by passion, aversion, and delusion. From the defilement of the mind are beings defiled. From the purification of the mind are beings purified. Monks, have you ever seen a moving picture show? Yes, Lord. That moving picture show was created by the mind, and this mind is even more variegated than a moving picture show. Thus one should reflect on one's mind with every moment. For a long time has this mind been defiled by passion, aversion, and delusion. From the defilement of the mind are beings defiled. From the purification of the mind are beings purified. This next paragraph is quite interesting. Monks, I can imagine no one group of beings more variegated than that of common animals. Common animals are created by mind, and the mind is even more variegated than common animals. Thus one should reflect on one's mind with every moment. For a long time has this mind been defiled by passion, aversion, and delusion. From the defilement of the mind are beings defiled. From the purification of the mind are beings purified. It's just as when there being dye, black, yellow, orpiment, indigo, or crimson, a dyer or painter would paint the picture of a woman or a man, complete in all its parts, on a well-polished panel or wall, or on a piece of cloth. In the same way, an uninstructed run-of-the-mill person, when creating, creates nothing but form, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness. So we have the example of the painter and the common animal being variegated but still created by the mind, moving picture show, and the dog, or just a dog. So that's quite a packed sutta, and I've thought about that with it especially walking around the neighborhood here, walking in Ansarand, you do see dogs that it seems like maybe that's sometimes and I've seen this before so many times, that a dog is tied to a tree given a fairly long leash, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, and that's where they live. The family or owner doesn't take them off that leash. And so I thought that was a very good example, like how this dog, it's not like a completely separate experience for the dog. It's not like the dog is like absolutely dependent on these aggregates. There's like no way out. It's this tethering, this clinging the leash that is has tied it there, and everything it does in every of the 4 postures that it has, it does everything in regards to these 5 aggregates. Standing right next to them, sitting, lying down. And then he says, defilement of the mind. From the defilement of the mind, beings are defiled. The purification of the mind, beings are purified. So I guess, I really like that metaphor. But this one sentence, I can imagine no one group of beings more variegated than that of common animals. Common animals are created by mind, and the mind is even more variegated than common animals. So that was quite a interesting. I mean, you just don't hear the Buddha kind of talking about something like that. In all the suttas, it's kind of common that he'll talk about how we create things like something like that in our minds. But unless it's like a specific translation from Ajahn Jeff, it's sort of saying that the idea of a common animal and their variety and their makeups, we still create that by our own mind. Is that something you've heard before, Lumpur, or some kind of just such an interesting?
It makes complete sense, especially in terms of science and evolutionary science. I mean, it's the mind that sort of moves first in terms of, and it's not sort of thought out in the same way, but it's the impulse to adapt comes from the impulse of the mind. So to me, it makes complete sense. Just it fits in with the evolutionary science.
That so it's not, because I was thinking of it as like our perception of animals, but you're thinking of like how any mind works, like an animal mind, a human mind.
Works,
we start absorbing the changes that we wish to see in the world.
Its reaction to its environment is, and its desire to shift or change or fit into a need is all sort of kind of mind driven.
Yeah. And so, I mean,
that's
just this.
That's my take on it.
And so, I mean, it would be the same for us in how we're appropriating everything that we're doing.
So even more complex.
And then that ends up in just how we change and adapt in our characteristics.
Yeah, even more complex, but still sort of basic.
Yeah. And so thus one should reflect on one's mind with every moment. For a long time has this mind been defiled by passion, aversion, and delusion. From the defilements of the mind are beings defiled. From the purification of the mind are beings purified. So that's great. I just find that such a rich sutta in terms of four examples the Buddha goes through.
Yeah, then those images are really, really wonderful.
Yeah, like talking about a moving picture show.
How would you view like the because it seems like the essence of what he's saying is like we create the Khandas, or creating the Khandas. Is that, am I saying that correctly?
I would say that I would say that it's an appropriation of how we like utilize them and use them, sort of like they're seen as sort of functions of our activities. And so my understanding is like it's a way that the Buddha divided up experience, and then we actually, in a certain way, appropriate them for our use of becoming, clinging, and identification. And so in that way, we're using these experiences to find something to cling to and identify with. And I think in that way, that's how the sort of creation occurs. So like created by mind. So it's something like kind of like a more simple, I think, example would be like just the idea of how we interpret things, and one person can see something that's based on them and it's interpreted the other. sees something completely different. So we're constantly creating and recreating our how we like interpret the experiences of the Khandas, if that makes
So
sense.
it's a matter of perception. So like someone would paint a painting of a man or woman in their particular way, and someone else might do it differently.
That's how. Well, or yeah, and then like it's that interpretation of the Khandas that we take up through our own, we pakakama our own like actions, and we keep kind of bringing that in, and it's our actual like appropriation of them based on that. So and what comes out of that appropriation is like identification, our clinging to them, and we would say that's what then gets reborn, is that clinging to those aggregates continues on, and so there is a taking up of new aggregates. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's sort of, to me, it's like the flavor, the combination, the flavor of the defilements or the underlying tendencies is what conditions and pushes one into the aggregates, and that the form that the aggregates take, and the shape and the quality and the experience is dependent on the particular mix of underlying tendencies that are pushing forth into existence, into becoming even at any one moment.
Okay, yeah. So
That becomes your experience. Yeah. The flavor of the experience of body and mind is shaped by that.
That makes sense. Like we're cooking, we're like making a soup or something, and we're like putting all these
Constantly
different
fabricating.
things.
Constantly fabricating.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think the Buddha is talking about the way that the Khandas work together are common to all sort of human experience, and then we keep kind of pulling at them and being like, "That's me, that's mine, that's what I'm doing," and then we keep clinging to them, and we can't put them down. They're us. They're what we are, or we think we're in them. And then when we die, if we've been confused by that, then we just pick it up again, because that's our natural inclination towards that craving. It's like not knowing of any other way. Was that a message?
After lunch.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. We're spared. So this is Sutta Samyutta 2279. And why do you call it form, rupa? Because it is afflicted, rupati. Thus it is called form. Afflicted with what? With cold and heat and hunger and thirst, with the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and reptiles. Because it is afflicted, it is called form. And why do you call it feeling? Because it feels. Thus it is called feeling. What does it feel? It feels pleasure, it feels pain, it feels neither pleasure nor pain. Because it feels, it is called feeling. And why do you call it perception? Because it perceives. Thus it is called perception. What does it perceive? It perceives blue, it perceives yellow, it perceives red, it perceives white. Because it perceives, it is called perception. And why do you call them fabrications, or also mental formations? Because they fabricate things. Because they fabricate fabricated things. Thus they are called fabrications. What do they fabricate into a fabricated thing? For the sake of formness, they fabricate form as a fabricated thing. For the sake of feelingness, they fabricate feeling as a fabricated thing. For the sake of perceptionhood, for the sake of fabrication, for the sake of consciousnesshood, they fabricate consciousness as a fabricated thing. Because they fabricate fabricated things, they are called fabrications. Why do you call it consciousness? Because it cognizes. Thus it is called consciousness. What does it cognize? It cognizes what is sour, bitter, pungent, sweet, alkaline, non-alkaline, salty, and unsalty. Because it cognizes, it is called consciousness. So that's an example, I think, of the functions, how the Buddha is describing the Khandas as functions. So we might not think of Vedana as what it's doing, but in this example the Buddha gives, he says, why do we call it Vedana? Because it feels. Thus it's called feeling. So that's also something very obvious the Buddha talks about, but if one weren't to actually hear the sutta, one could think that these descriptions of the Khandas are just solid things. Not that they're doing something or there's a function behind them. Like feeling is just a feeling, but it actually is the feeling, like it feels, is part of that understanding of the Khandas. Yes.
Is he saying that form is, the function of form is to interface between the world and the aggregate of form? I suppose it seems out of place that it talks about form being afflicted, but that's the main function of it, whereas the others seem quite straightforward. What's your take on affliction for form?
Well, I think it's like, I think it's saying like the way that form is, the activity of form is its affliction, and that is true. That's what he describes that differently, is like it perceives or it feels in terms of form because it is afflicted. That's why it's called form. So I think that's pretty much tied to it. That he's talking about cold, heat, hunger, and thirst, touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun. So it's like the function of form is that it gets afflicted by something. So it's not just like an atom floating out in the ether. It's that as a Khanda, that because it's clung to and identified, it is something that is naturally in the function of being afflicted. So that's kind of my take on it.
It seems like for all the areas he's talking about is just some example of what their full purpose is, like for how Ajahn talked about and tastes, I think. And so for maybe form, which is what talks about affliction, that can also be touched by, say, pleasant things and things like this that maybe you just didn't mention because he's talking about some other examples.
Yeah, the difference here is interesting, is he says rupa, form, and rupati is afflicted. So it doesn't say form is formed, it says form is afflicted. So I think that's the kind of ideas that anything that takes up a form has that potential for being afflicted. And I would say in that, obviously, like I'm saying, different than like the form of like, it's more like you could say contact. Because contact is very much tied to form, right? So it's not like without contact. That's why I think Ajahn Jeff objected to body being the translation of form, because he doesn't just think it's body. It's the form and contact that are kind of in conjunction with each other.
Also in that sutta, sometimes you have to give the Buddha poetic license because he's riffing on plays on words. So he's having to make do with some word, or there's inevitably a strike sometimes when you're teaching.
And that's a super important point in terms of context of the suttas, because as Lumpur is pointing out, we just get the English translation, so we sometimes actually don't get these riffs or word plays.
Yeah.
And without an understanding of a wordplay, if it's just explained in English without that wordplay, you might completely miss why the Buddha chose a particular word. And Ajahn Chah would do the same thing.
Ajahn Chah would do the same thing. And sometimes, it's a bit of a stretch, and sometimes it really works.
Also, take away from that, he talks about form is form because it deforms. I think, is that part of that one?
Not that is another one, but that's not in this one.
I was just thinking about the quality of deforms anyway as constantly changing, and that points to its afflicted nature. Even if it's pleasant, it's constantly changing, and therefore afflicted.
No, because it's just he's got a word close by, rupa,
Yeah, I mean,
That's my take on it.
Makes sense.
yeah, like I think it's quite helpful. Like the Buddha talks about how important the Khandas are, and so then, like in, for example, the Khanda Samyutta or these other places where he's pointing them out, they're just like he's got to kind of pull out all these different ways of explaining them because they're not straightforward. It's not a straightforward approach to understanding. And then I think the other thing that human beings do when they hear explanations is they want to grasp onto them, and therein you get kind of a cyclical way of how beings like even your own kind of conception of the Khandas becomes something that you can try to cling to or say it's like this. And so the Buddha is trying to pull out many different ways of looking at them so we don't cling to them. So now moving to one of the more famous suttas on what the Buddha has talked about with the Khandas, and that is many people have heard this before. This is a lump of foam, and this is sutta number 95 from the Khanda Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Ayodhya on the bank of the river Ganges. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, suppose that this river Ganges was carrying along a great lump of foam. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of foam there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? Suppose, bhikkhus, that in the autumn, when it is raining and big raindrops are falling, a water bubble arises and bursts on the surface of the water. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a water bubble? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of feeling there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in feeling? Suppose, bhikkhus, that in the last month of the hot season at high noon, a shimmering mirage appears. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a mirage? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of perception there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or gross, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in perception? Suppose, bhikkhus, that a man needing heartwood, seeking heartwood, wandering in search of heartwood, would take a sharp axe and enter a forest. There he would see the trunk of a large plantain tree, straight, fresh, without a fruit bud core. He would cut it down at the root, cut off the crown, and unroll the coil. As he unrolls the coil, he would not find even softwood, let alone heartwood. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in the trunk of a plantain tree? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of volitional formations there are, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects them, ponders them, and carefully investigates them. As he investigates them, they appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in volitional formations? Suppose, bhikkhus, that a magician or a magician's apprentice would display a magical illusion at a crossroads. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a magical illusion? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in consciousness? Seeing thus, bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple experiences revulsion towards them. Revulsion towards form, revulsion towards feeling, revulsion towards perception, revulsion towards volitional formations, revulsion towards consciousness. Experiencing revulsion, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. He understands, destroyed his birth, the holy life has been lived, what has been done. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. This is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Fortunate One, the teacher, further said this: form is like a lump of foam, feeling like a water bubble, perception is like a mirage, volition is like a plantain trunk, and consciousness like an illusion. So explained the kinsman of the sun. However, one may ponder it and carefully investigate it. It appears but hollow and void when one views it carefully. With reference to this body, the one of broad wisdom has taught that with the abandoning of three things, one sees this form discarded. When vitality, heat, and consciousness depart from this physical body, then it lies there, cast away, food for others, without volition. Such is this continuum, this illusion. The beguiler of fools is taught to be a murderer. Here no substance can be found. A bhikkhu with energy aroused should look upon the aggregates thus, whether by day or at night, comprehending, ever mindful. He should discard all the fetters and make a refuge for himself. Let him fare as with the head ablaze, yearning for the imperishable state. So yeah, that's one of the very excellent suttas on similes of the Khandas. And so this Bhikkhu Bodhi analyzes these, and just to read some of these notes. He says, one evening when dwelling in the abode, the Blessed One came out from his fragrant cottage and sat down by the bank of the Ganges. He saw a great lump of foam coming downstream and thought, I will give a Dhamma talk relating to the five aggregates. He addressed the bhikkhu sitting around him. Sutta is one of the most radical discourses on the empty nature of conditioned phenomena. Its imagery, especially the similes of the mirage and the magical illusion, has been taken up by later Buddhist thinkers, most persistently by the Madhyamikas. Some of the images are found elsewhere in the Pali Canon, in the Dhammapada 46 and 170. In the context of early Buddhist thought, these similes have to be handled with care. They are not intended to suggest an illusionist view of the world, but to show that our conceptions of the world and of our own existence are largely distorted by the process of cognition, just as the mirage and magical illusion are based on real existence. The sand of the desert, the magician's appurtenances, so these false conceptions arise from a base that objectively exists, namely the five aggregates, but when seen through a mind subject to conceptual distortion, the aggregates appear in a way that deviates from their actual nature. Instead of being seen as transient and selfless, they appear as substantial and as self. And he goes on further explaining commentaries, looking into this. The highlights of what they say is, as a lump of foam, in the example, a lump of foam lacks any substance, so form lacks any substance that is permanent, stable, or a self. As the lump of foam is full of holes and fissures and the abode of many creatures, so too form, as the lump of foam, after expanding, breaks up, so does form, which is pulverized in the mouth of death. And then he talks about a bubble is feeble, cannot be grasped. It breaks up as soon as it is seized. So too feeling is feeble and cannot be grasped as permanent and stable. As a bubble arises and ceases in a drop of water and does not last long, so too with feeling. And then it looks like this is an Abhidhamma analysis. 100,000 kotis of feeling arise and cease in the time of a finger snap. One koti is 10 million. So that's a million. As a bubble arises in dependence on conditions, so feeling arises in dependence on a sense base, an object, the defilements, and contact. And he says, perception is like a mirage in the sense that it is insubstantial, for one cannot grasp a mirage to drink or bathe or fill a pitcher. As a mirage deceives the multitude, so does perception, which entices people with the idea that the colorful object is beautiful, pleasurable, and permanent. And a plantain trunk is an assemblage of many sheaths, each with its own characteristic, so the aggregate of volitional formations is an assemblage of many phenomena, each with its own characteristic. And then finally, consciousness is like a magical illusion in the sense that it is insubstantial and cannot be grasped. Consciousness is even more transient and fleeting than a magical illusion, for it gives the impression that a person comes and goes, stands and sits with the same mind, but the mind is different in each of these activities. Consciousness deceives the multitude like a magical illusion. He says specifically in terms of the aggregate of consciousness, the aggregate mass is a murderer in two ways, because the aggregates slay each other and because murder appears in dependence on the aggregates. As to when the earth element breaks up, it takes along the other elements, and when the form aggregate breaks up, it takes along the mental aggregates. And when the aggregates exist, such things as murder, bondage, injury, etc., come into being. So that's his explanation of the comparison of the aggregates to murderers. So yeah, that's sort of quite a favored sutta. Any questions or comments on that sutta at all?
Considering that most of us don't have experience with plantain trees, I was wondering if it would make sense to think of that analogy also in terms of nesting China bells.
Oh, what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, like or an onion. Usually an onion is the typical explanation. Most people have seen an onion. I liked a teacher I had in college who was talking about it, and he said the common thing is for somebody to think when you pull off the layers of the onion, then you just have nothing. So there's nothing there. But then he was also quick to point out, no, you have the layers. So I think like that, when we think of selfhood, that's where the Buddha wasn't tending towards annihilation and saying like, he didn't say self doesn't exist. He just said it's not self. So it's more of a misunderstanding of what those layers are. Because we reify them, we're trying to make them solid and permanent. But it doesn't mean that then it's annihilationist view, like there's nothing, which is what Bhikkhu Bodhi was also pointing out. It's not like I can kind of have maybe Ajahn Cunda and I are arguing with each other, and I just say to him finally, "You're just a sankhara, you don't exist." And he says, "Thanks, that's really nice. I actually do exist." So it's like the misunderstanding would be to take this on and to say that like none of this, nothing actually exists. It's all illusion. It's all completely mind created. And the Buddha didn't get into that. He was asked that many times, but I think he saw that as the mind creating an annihilationist point of view. And so as I understand it, that's why it's important to point out that a teaching like not self, or a teaching on the illusion of the aggregates, isn't to say that there's nothing there. There's no thing. It's just that we can still create the things that are there, and so they're still illusions, even though there's something that might be present. I don't know if you have any.
But just the thought that always keeps coming up to mind when contemplating that Khandas, particularly in relation to not self, is that it's not and you said this in one way or another, that it's not like a metaphysical doctrine that's trying to be expounded to define existence or non-existence. It's a contemplative strategy, to deconstruct what it is that we think is ourselves to get to the root of suffering.
Right. And to end it,
yeah.
And that's the incredibly important point. Is like the Buddha has this teaching: I teach this and this alone, suffering and the end of suffering.
Right.
Whereas like but what about all this other stuff? And he's like, no, that's not important. So that's kind of the beauty of his teachings. But it's interesting that the grasping mind for 2,500 years, after his 2,600 years, just keeps trying to form some sort of like substantiality around what this all means. And like the Abhidhamma, I think, might be a good example of that, in terms of all the myriad explorations, thousands of years of cosmological trying to figure it all out. Well, it is 10:30, and got through about 50% of the readings. So we can conclude today, and I'll do one more day on the Khandas and then Lumpur and start after that. Thank you.